What up, everybody? Scuff D here, and today we're going to do ourselves a little deck play, deck review, deck highlights, as it were. Just this weekend, Lotara Sarrin was in the shop. Now, Lotara Sarrin actually was the third. Was she the third? Yeah, she was the third neutral warlord. No, yeah. Did she come out before Fail or not? Actually, you know what? Shoot, I don't know if she was the second or third warlord. It was for the Imperials that debuted in the game. But she's been up for a while. She came out with an exclusive deck. I never picked up the exclusive deck. It had like a really nifty card back. That's the one that I use, but I think she's actually got some nifty card back if you want to go for that route. And then I think her deck had like Duke Mortimer in it. This weekend anyways, for people who wanted to spend the money for an epic warlord. A lot of people passed on that. I cannot fault them. I don't think that's a fantastic deal. It's one thing if she's new or exclusive, but she's been out for a couple years. Her ability, however, has remained the same. It's very consistent. She did get a slight tweak and upgrade, which actually improved her play style and her playability. I'm just going through the ones that I have. No wonder I'm not finding that. I'm like, where is that card? But there it is. That's the one that you get with her, the Conqueror, right? But I don't have that one. That's okay. I'm not a card back guy. So she came out with that card back, and new warlord, new epic warlord, legendary in the deck. Whether or not you picked up the deck or not, you may already have Lotara Sarrin. If you've been playing for a while, you most likely have Lotara. She's not a bad warlord as far as neutrals go. In general, that's my stance on a lot of warlords, is they're not bad warlords. I have a lot of fun with her. She works really good with a couple challenges, especially if you're having to play troops with frontline or troops that cost 2 or less. She has that ability built right in. Her ability puts, for 2 energy, she puts in play a 2/3 armsman, which is a frontline troop that has flank. It's pretty simple. You just use her ability through the course of several games and you meet those challenges. But that ability in of itself offers a lot of protection. Her initiative is medium, so that's okay. And then she got this Ursa's Claw added to her after, I would say probably after a month or two. She just wasn't quite up to snuff. Having a flanking warlord flanking troop was one thing, but as the game gets later, that's not as effective. And essentially, if she wants to protect any troops, she's paying 2 energy to protect them. So she's always behind curve, even though she's getting an extra body for it. Whereas the Ogre and Sergeant, the most recent deck play I did, is just straight free, right? He just uses an attack and he can play everything on curve. Lotara Sarrin, continuing on my frontline kick, is one of those warlords who can generate constant frontline value. I enjoy it when I transform into her with Calitus Assassin, but just her ability in general is solid. But that Ursa's Claw is really what helped kick her over into into a more aggressive or board dominant style. And what that is that's 0 energy. It's a once per game use, but you stun all enemies and then you draw a card. So smart play of this early on, or even if you hold it for late game reasons, can be devastating to your opponent and just solidify your hold on the board. So I want to go ahead and do a couple game replays here. I'll play the Jagged Icon. This is just a good example of how constant frontline, constant troop presence can just shut down a warlord, especially an aggressive warlord. Lotara Sarrin, she in of herself is not a hard counter. If you build her deck right, she can be a hard counter to several very specific playstyles. She still has her vulnerabilities, of course, but she can become a hard counter. This deck here, a Jagged Icon, he is a mono-centric warlord. He has a lot of cards that focus on dealing damage. Most people play him with a lot of tactics, very few troops. And therefore, if you can dominate the board long enough and get an aggressive enough approach and have enough troops that are dealing consistent damage, such as the Sagittarius squad, the mortar carrier, as well as attacking troops, before he can hit his reckoning, then you can lock and solve the game. And the fact that you've got frontline protecting those vulnerable bodies for a while really forces him to play his tactics early on against those cards. So that's a good approach. That's a good way to go. Couple that, this deck here that I've got for Lotara, and after this game I'll show the deck. I'll show the deck list itself. But I've got very hard counters against tactics. Now, you're going to take a beating for tactics every now and then. He's already played 2, killed off a couple troops, building up his hand, but I know that in the long game, I've got Lernia Hydra, I've got Shield Generator, I also have an Edict of Nikeah in the deck that also can function late game if I need to. And I don't really care that that Shield Generator is going to buff up my Orbital Bombardment. As a matter of fact, that's a penalty for him. If and when he removes that Shield Generator, then I can play that Orbital Bombardment, and ideally, his Warlord is all by himself, especially as a mono Warlord should be, and then he just allowed me to deal 10 damage across the board and win the game. So, her ability, being able to play constant frontline troops, you don't have to play that every turn. As I did here, I didn't play that every turn. But I've got Tactic Protection. I've got a 6 health troop, which I know is going to either require a flanking or a fast. In this case, he goes for the fast and the face strike to get rid of it. But also what that does here is when he plays a troop that has to stay out, it's affecting the cost of his reckoning. He's not going to be able to reckon faster. That's Jagdtai's specific thing. So that's good. That's good for me. The more that forces him out there, the longer that goes. That denies him that option until later. But being able to protect troops such as the Veletaris, and they're just kind of in there as an anti-troop presence, or the mortar carriers of the Skitarii, as low attack as they may be, the consistent threat that they provide. If I'm able to protect Jubok Starsight, I'm gaining card advantage. If I'm able to protect a Duke Mortimer every turn, I'm gaining board domination because of his ability. If I'm able to protect a vehicle late game, just even for 10 energy, I throw out Lernia Hydra, which increases the cost of tactics, and then I throw out a front line, so now they have to play either a tactic or have some sort of flanking attack to get rid of that front line before they can even address my big nasty tank. Then that's just doubling down on the effect. Now, Pyramid of Photep is really just kind of in this deck primarily for the memes, but I do find that it adds some options in there, especially when I've got, even though I've got like tactic hate like shield generators, sometimes that can be a thing where, you know, they get rid of my shield generators and I've got a handful of tactics that Pyramid of Photep has created. I think this is one such game that kind of shows this, because I mean we're going into the long reach here, and the more troops he throws down, just the better it's getting for me. Still no White Tiger Dao for Jagdtai, but he's also really shut himself down from reckoning on 9 energy because of all the troops that he's played that have stayed out, and that's okay. I'd like to see, honestly, I'd like to see Jagdtai's throwing down more troops than they're known for. I think the White Scars have got some great troops as a whole, but Lotara herself, just that consistent troop presence on the board is one thing, and if you add in the neutral cards that can really help with that can really like bolster that, whether that be Forge Complex, which is creating more troops in your hand the longer the game goes, whether that is troops that have lockdown abilities, or whether that is just troops that are consistent in terms of their game effects. If I'm able to protect, for instance, just off the top of my head, a Ramare, the 7/3 legendary sneak attack stealth. If I'm able to protect that, and it's very low health and it's a vulnerable card, but that's 7 attack on a Warlord, and then I pay 2 energy and I protect it, my opponent now has to play tactics that can either deal direct damage to that, or they're going to have to deal with the front line before they can deal with it. If I'm playing a Pyramid of Photep, that's normally, like against Lotara, Ambassador Melgator is a very effective card against Mount Pharos or Duke Mortimer. Those are the biggest cards that cause threats to the opponent. And that's usually what they'll save that Ambassador Melgator for. But you're passing over all those other troops too. The las rifle section, the Skitarii peltasts, the Skitarii auxiliary, Joker company dealing damage to stealth. There's a lot of other juicy targets for Ambassador Melgator within a Lotara deck. Ideally, depends on how you go about it. And right here, I've just got a deck full of like one frontline troop, every turn 2 energy to consistently protect these cards. And force my opponent to deal with them rather than my warlord. Again, a very, very important style is put out targets that your opponent cannot ignore against your warlord, and then sit back for the long game. That's usually how I like to operate. I like to have targets that forces my opponent to do something against them rather than dealing directly with my warlord. And you have an aggro warlord, an aggressive warlord like Jagtai Khan, who has no choice. Not only can he not go after, he can't ignore Pharaohs, he can't ignore the 6/4 troop, he can't get to my warlord first, he has to go through that front line. That buys me time, that denies him his turns, and that just really helps me just solidify and lock down what I want to lock down on the board. And at this point here, I think I've exhausted all his troop options, all his little techs, and he's going to go into, an attempt for a purge just to get rid of the tactics, because he probably has a hand full of like White Tiger Dow, Skilled Rider, he's got Stormlance, so now he can happily destroy that. Not sure why he didn't destroy the troop. I think he probably felt he could eke it out for one more turn. But again, Orbital Bombardment, and that's actually, that in of itself is 15 damage, not counting what the troops are going to throw down with the sentence effect, and I think he resigns during the course of this bombardment. Now, this is just an example of when everything goes right? When you're able to protect Pharaohs and get some tactics, when you're able to protect Pharaohs and get some troops, and Pyramid of Photep and get some tactics. Again, for the memes more than anything. Taking a look at the card list itself, the deck list itself doesn't deviate too often. Typically, a Lotara Sarrin deck, big play, big important play early in the game is those Farron's Militia. For 1 energy, not first turn, but second turn, ideally. With 3 energy, you play a Farron's Militia, you use her ability to create a second frontline troop, and then ideally that's usually when you're going to want to hit the just drawing a blank on the name of her card all of a sudden, on the Ursa's Claw. That's when you're going to want to fire the Ursa's Claw, which I think is what I did in that game. You could also follow it up with some awesome Secretary Peltast. Not Secretary Peltast, the Secretary Axiarch, to bolster those Farron's Militia the next turn. At 4 energy, you pay to generate a front line, throw down the Axiarch, and now all your troops that are on the board have a 3 attack, and that's nice. And then from there, you proceed to build up. That's a typical core Lotara deck, or Lotara staples, I guess you could say. The rest of the cards really kind of fall into what you want to see. Do you want artillery strike, or do you want defensive satellites for your random damage? Do you feel like you need more bodies, Smirnov's Warriors or McCormick's Mercenaries? Or, I'm sorry, not McCormick's Reapers. Do you need anti-stealth? Most decks need some anti-stealth. I've doubled down on it with both the Peltasts and the Joker Company. It may be overkill, but I find that Peltasts are a nice little tasty surprise for people sometimes in stealth. And then what are your big closers? What are your big board lockdowns? You've got Duke Mortimer, you've got the like I said, the Sagittarius Squad, as well as the mortar carriers. Again, with the mortar carriers being protected by a front line, it makes it very hard for your opponent to flank them. It's not impossible. There's unstoppable flankers or late game that can throw a tactic out, but if they can't, if they have to throw in 2 or 3 cards just to get rid of this one card, you've done a really good exchange. And then you've got your Mount Pharos, and then whatever else you want to tie it into. Now, my deck here, I've doubled down on both the stealth hate as well as the tactic hate for consistency. So I've doubled down on my tactic hate in terms of, I've tripled down, you could almost say, with the shield generator as a late game throwdown, even as a mid game throwdown. learning a Hydra as a late game throwdown, as well as just a big beefy body, and then Edict of Censure. So that is kind of a trinity, as you will, of tactic hate. Just when my opponent thinks that they're out of the water, that they've removed one threat, I can throw it down again. I can double up on it if I so choose. And giving up on that, giving up on tactics, allows me to focus more on troops that deal damage, troops that have got either abilities themselves to help with the board control, or rally abilities, or just the fact of any damage. Now, this isn't a perfect deck list. There's definitely, as I've combined a lot of things or doubled down, you could easily tweak out, 6-7 cards. You could change things up depending on what your card list looks like. As you can see, I've got some legendaries in here. I've also got some epics, but a Lotara deck can be very functional with just some rares. We'll take another good look at another gameplay, and then we'll take a look at some options. Maybe a couple games depending on how quick they go. A couple of the options. There's Tarvitz. That one's pretty quick. As far as what other possible cards that you could use in with her. Now, I'm going to pass on both these cards for Tarvitz. He doesn't run a lot of early stealth, and Forge Complex against him is going to be a bad card to throw out. I'm not too happy with what I get there, but I know that at the same time, Tarvitz does run tactics, and if I can drop his hand at 5 energy and blow his chance to throw out big, heavy, nasty stuff, if I can survive, if he doesn't do it at 4 energy, then I'm in a good spot. And the fact that I'm actually got the initiative in this game, I think, is the big upsell, because that throws it off. If he would have gone first, I wouldn't be able to stun him. And I fired the Ursa's Claw right out the gate because I do not want Tarvitz to be putting down 3 energy stuff. I don't want him being able to, I want him behind. I want a body on the board, some additional stuff. So right from the get-go, that's what I've got to do. And because I've got 2 troops on the board, he can't use his ability and get rid of the only troop I've got. He's got to attack. He's got to play a tactic. So that's the strategy. That's what I'm going for. Just push down as much as I possibly can, get to this 5 energy point, and then from there, I feel I could hit comfortably with either Duke, Helios, using my ability. I think Duke would be a good follow-up because anything that he throws down that's big and nasty that he's lower the cost for, I can proceed to throw up. And he's throwing down some stun as well as the card draw, which, that's expected. The tactic there, Longinus, is a strong card. I think I'm going to go with Duke first, just because I want him to press out one more. And I'm probably gambling here with this, but the fact that he's filled up his hand so hard, and he's lowered the cost, and that Perfection Flight was almost anticipated. So he's getting rid of some hard removal. And from here, I feel comfortable at this point. Even though he's got a lot of cards in his hand, I feel comfortable actually putting down some more bodies. He hasn't put down any threats. He could play a big tactic and throw down a Desperate Defense here in about 1 more energy. And I think that's probably the deck build that he was going for. So, yeah, I don't know. This was an interesting game. As the game itself evolved, it was kind of like, okay, well, let's see what my options are. The front line there, the Ornithos Barge kind of threw me off because I don't want to blow 5 energy and not have and still have them have those troops on the board that have to be addressed. That's not a position I want to be in necessarily. So I want to hit him hard. I want to have him have to deal with the cards that I've got on the board. He can't just blow his ability to throw down a card or a troop that's not going to do him anything. So at this point, at Defensive Satellites, I would expect to try to wipe the board. Said he's going to go Doombringer, which kind of confirms my suspicions that what he's trying to do here is a desperate defense. Doombringer at 7 energy is nice. He's going to wipe out several of my troops. And so now the race becomes on to kind of keep my board relevant, right? I could throw down the Hydra. I could throw down Edict as well as a frontline troop. I could throw down the Pyramid. I'm going to go with the Edict gamble and then get rid of that Doombringer that really wastes his hand. And I imagine there was probably a Desperate Defense and a Tactical Brilliance in there. And as much as that Mortar's Carrier is vulnerable, he has to use his Warlord to attack it or play a fast troop. And he knows that I can then just throw down some more troops and bodies from there that's not going to hurt me at all. Again, learning a Hydra confirms my suspicions, because that's just a nice big body to drop early on in the game, or drop for 8 and drop 2 of those. So I can throw out some front lines at this point and just pelt, and I think I've kind of broken his strategy with that edict. So I feel really good. And then if his hand were to build up any higher, if he were to draw cards or have it build up any higher, I could throw down that shield generator, throw down my own Lernia Hydra. I feel pretty comfortable with where that's at. Forge Complex is not going to do me any good here. I'm looking for... Geez, I'm getting notifications left and right. I'm just looking for ways to stall out the game, put down bodies, and just force him to deal with my stuff versus my Warlord. And so far that's working, and that's kind of the strategy. He's got to spend a whole body. He doesn't have any tactics in hand, so he couldn't get rid of my my frontline troop. He had to throw that all out there. Throws down another big troop, which is great if he were to get it with desperate defense, but the fact that he's just paying all that energy just to throw out that one troop, and it bounces, and I can put multiple bodies on the board, that's really what's going to be the driving factor. I put the Photep down here more as just extra insurance. Whether that creates a good tactic or not, he can't return it to my hand. He can't do anything that he bounces. I can play my Mortar Carrier again at full health. I've got Armsman who has got flank. I can play him again. It's good game from there. So I actually went a little bit longer than I anticipated, but that's how Lotara works. Now let's take a look at some cards that you can play in place of her. Because she's a neutral, you're looking just at neutral cards. She's not going to have any faction cards. You could easily, and I'm going to try to point out cards of all rarity, you could easily go more into a few more tactics. You don't have to go super heavy, because with the front line, the idea is you're protecting things. Whether you're protecting your Warlord or you're protecting troops, you want to protect things. But having Lactitio to draw cards is an option. In addition to that, Kai's Elaine in place of Pyramid of Photep if you have one or the other. I think Kai's Elaine is actually a little bit better, especially early game. He's proven to be much better. You've got a little bit more control as far as what you're getting. And then you could do very easily, where is the Angelic Presence? I actually like that in terms that late game, having the board full of all those troops that you saw, I can give them all +0/+1. Keep them out of range of defensive satellites or Doombringer, or I could just heal Warlord. I got that card in my Ogren deck, my Ogren Sergeant deck, and I really enjoy it. It actually works out really well. Jubok is already in there. Let's see. You could do with some card drawing. Salin 11th, although I prefer to have McCormick's Reapers in there, or a 4/4 body. It becomes a target for Ambassador Melgator. It's a consistent threat pressure. If you don't have them, or you've got the upgraded version, Smirnov's Warriors, that's just as good. Then you could throw in some more front lines, some forced Ogrens, some beefier front line, as it were. You could play with Arcology, although personally I feel like for Lotara, protecting Arcology isn't as good as an exchange as opposed to protecting a bigger troop. At 7 energy, for instance, if I'm protecting Ogre and Sergeant, while that's only going to get buffed when my Warlord's damaged, and I'm ideally protecting my Warlord, I still have a 6/7 body. Command Post, as a common, is a fantastic troop. Theoretically, if you've already baited out your opponent's Ambassador Melgator with your either your Ogren or your Velateris or your McCormick's, you throw down that Command Post at 9 health. It's nice and beefy, and then every turn, at the very minimum, every turn for 2 energy plus 1 energy, you're getting a 4/5 flanking front line. That's not counting if you should throw down other troops from within your deck. I think Command Post, having one of those, is a really good build. I like to go into the Mechanicum aspect because they've got a lot of cards that synergize well. You could easily throw in some of the Alpha Thetas. These guys here are perfect sitting behind a front line because they become a target that your opponent got to get past your front line. They've also got to get past your they've also got to deal 4 damage. That's either 2 tactics or 2 to 3 attacks, and then if they don't, just 1 to 2 mechandrites that this guy can create, whether it be shield, additional health, +2, +3 to attack. that's extra value, that's extra options to your deck. So I like alpha thetas in that, and then coupled with that, if you're going Mechanica more so, you could throw in Laz Taul, and also some Skitarii protectors if you want to do more anti-stealth. Perhaps instead of the Skitarii Peltasts, you could go into Skitarii protectors. And Doombringer. Doombringer is another end game scenario there in terms of boom, I throw down a big body. Yes, it's vulnerable, but for 10 energy, it's protected. And then it's dealing damage across the board. You've got to get through a front line. You've also got to get through this. A big strategy with Lotara and the Helios Mortar Carrier, Doombringer, Lernia Hydra is, of course, then you go a little bit more into tactics and you're playing supply lines. And that lets you get those cards out even faster. That lets you 4-8 energy, which was normally when you would play Doombringer. You can play Doombringer plus a front line. And if you still have your Ursa's Claw, you fire it then, doing even more damage. Because it stuns your opponent's board, depending on what troops that they've got focused out there. Coriel Zeth is also just a good legendary to have, because of just the hard removal option. But I don't think she's necessary exactly. Earlier versions of Neutrino Irradiator would have been really good with her because that was like a relentless ability. Now I would say not so much. Chaos, as far as Chaos goes, really what you're going in for Chaos might be for the Cygnus Fanatic, because you're going to have a lot of low health troops. You're going to have a lot of low health troops, and these disciples, these Cygnus cultists, they all kind of tie together. You go a little bit more Chaos side, not necessarily Shivarin. Where are they at? Did I scroll past them? These guys, the Cygnus Acolytes. They're very cheap. They all come out fairly cheap. They can all synergize together. You can protect them well. And while your front lines are dying and buffing this guy up, late game 6 energy, mid game you bring out Aclium, boom, all your Chaos infantry have got +2/+0. You've got her protected, and you've got some big nasty cultists. And then to kind of go in with that, instead of like Pyramid of Photep and Mount Pharos, maybe instead you put 2 8-fold brand in there. You put 2 8-fold brands, so you're getting extra bodies. You will always have options to put troops on the board, even if it's just to draw fire. And then late game, you kind of finish up with a Slayer of Worlds, just to boom. Here's a big nasty 15/15. You killed all my guys. Thanks. You made it easier for me to play this. And then for 2 energy more, I just protect it with a front line. It's a little ridiculous. But that's the way it works. She's very versatile. As a neutral warlord goes, she's very versatile. Her ability, as it is, puts in a troop that protects things, whether that is her or whether that is troops. And because the neutral troop pool is pretty big and roughly synergizes, whether it is vehicles, a synergy of vehicles with supply lines and cards in the Mechanicum that bolster vehicles, whether that's just Mechanicum cards in general that tie in together and give additional boosts, Mechandrites, whatever the case may be with Mechanicum cards, or whether that's Chaos and cultists generating troops and generating marks of chaos and just getting wacky and wonky and bringing out a demon or two. They all synergize well, and her ability is just kind of simply an extra little icing that mixes in nicely. She can protect, she can protect, she can protect, all the while you're kind of building the board that you want to see. Now, her big vulnerabilities obviously are tactics, right? Tactical damage, whether that is destroying the low-cost troops or just dealing direct damage to her, that's big. That's one. Another very big one that often has been seen play a lot is Unstoppable Warlords. Unstoppable Warlords coupled with Warlords who have 3 attack, for instance, Rom, is a very hard counter to her. When I say hard counter, I mean really what you're doing is you're not doing anything. He can chew up your guys, he can spit them out, and it doesn't hurt him at all, and he can play a board. It's just a fair exchange. He doesn't lose health, he's killing them, healing too. Unless you have a way to bolster their attack, your early game is going to suffer, and that's going to make your late game much harder. Whereas Angron, who has 3 attack, does not have the same luxury. He's got 3 attack, and yes, his end game is to get to low health, to get to Whispers off. But the fact that every turn he has to play a card or a tactic or something to get through your front line, you're actually whittling him down. There's a trade-off there, right? So every turn he has to lose a card just to damage your Warlord, and that's going to get frustrating. It's kind of ironic that she can be a, not necessarily a hard counter, but a very stiff counter to Angron. The fact that I throw in all the extra anti-tactic stuff is really kind of the salt in the wound for me anyways. And then you've got like warlords that are unstoppable, like Korax Kurz, Sanguinius, and Kabanda. Those guys can ignore her frontline altogether. The fact that they all have very strong faction card pools, that extra easier. Whether they are throwing out demons that are, you know, getting beefier with the mutations, or whether they are stealthing up for a nice sentence attack on your opponent's warlord because of all the stealth troops that they've got, which is one reason why I've got anti-stealth in the deck, or if they're just going off for a reckoning with Sanguinius, and they've got a lot of strong landing troops. Yes, your flanking troops can break their drop pods, but maybe that's what they want. They want you to get rid of their troops so that Sanguinius can go into uber angry angel mode, and then he becomes, you know, a 7/7 with bloodthirst, and then it doesn't matter how many front lines you have because he can just one turn just swoop in and finish off Lotara. Now that takes some cards to work specifically, but it's not impossible. It's fairly consistent Blood Angel strategy with Sanguinius. So there are some hard counters there, and a couple of those are still very popular, still high level play, but they're not the only games in town. And I think if you take a deck, especially if you take it and you tool it for some of those matchups to really assist with what you're trying to do, and which is one reason why I've got so much tactic hate as well as stealth hate in there. I think you get a better feel when you have those matches. You're still going to have a hard time. You know, ROM is still going to be a pain for you, but the idea is that, you know, it's not just a feeling like an auto lose, and that's the whole point. Lotara in of herself can be a very, very fun matchup against a lot of decks. As you saw, you just saw 2 games there. Her play rate here, and I generally just play her for challenge matches, but I've been playing her a little bit over the weekend just because to get hyped for the video and because she was on sale. I was like, you know, it's been a while since I just dived into her more so. So, you know, this is a 67-ish% win rate. Yes, it's in practice, but that's with just the deck that I showed you with like no changes. There's nothing in here from Malevolence, I don't think, and there very well should be and could be. And I think if you tweak this deck and I were to improve it, I'd see even more consistency and more enjoyment. I don't think I need 2 shield generators. I just have had them in there for the longest time, and that's just the way it's been. I could easily take those out and instead put in 2 Lernia Hydras and put in a Doombringer and put in 2 supply lines and have a better late game scenario versus a game of trying to shut down my opponent's tactics. It's nice when it happens, but it's also nice to have big nasty vehicles on the board too. So that is Lotara Sarrin. That's a couple games here. That's a deck list. That's some ideas as far as cards go with what works. I'm going to leave you with a 3rd game here with Perturabo. I think I had one pinned, actually. We'll just play through these fast. And it just kind of, I don't know how fast the Perturabo game goes. I'll be honest with you guys. Even though this was just like last night, I don't really know. And I think, you know, here's a deck that could be, depending on how the Iron Warriors deck is built, that could be a lot of direct damage. It's essentially at 10 energy, he's done lethal on my Warlord just by using his ability, right? So I've got to throw out tactics and bodies that are going to delay that effect as much as I possibly can. And I think that's what I'm going to try to do here. Another thing with having front lines, if you can have 2/4 energy, don't attack with that first one. Create it, sit it. Make your opponent either attack with it. They've got so that is a fast guy. I don't know what he had in his hand, but whatever he had, it wasn't working out for him. There it is. I knew I had a pinned game down here. This game goes a little bit longer, but it was a good game. It's a Blood Angels game. It kind of tries to hard counter the Blood Angels end game scenario as much as possible. The fact that I like to put out a front line and then second turn, ideally not attack with that front line, gives my opponent a harder time to get through that front line. Again, whether I'm protecting a Fairn's Militia, or a Sagittari squad, and it forces whatever the warlord is, especially if it's a warlord like Tarvitz, Martarian, any warlord that's got an ability that isn't really an attack ability or a damage dealing ability, something that they've got to lose for a turn, the option to use. I can't stun, I can't reduce cost of card, I've got to deal with that threat. You've switched up the advantage, you've switched up the timing. The fact that he's playing that flank card on that troop right there, that says a lot to me. It says I'm in a good position here. I can feel pretty comfortable about throwing down some bodies. I might just be fine sitting out here. He's got some tactics in hand. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just got another drop pod troop. But he's threatened by my lowly board, and that's a good place to be. I like that. So we're going to double down on that. We're going to throw down. We're going to improve. We're going to make my board bigger and stronger, and we're going to force him to respond to my troops as much as possible. The higher up we go, though, and this is something to keep in mind with any troop-based deck, or deck that, like, whether it be Lotara, Lucretia, Tarvitz, anything that you're designed to try to rush, try to get as much of the low-cost stuff out as quickly as possible. That's great for 2 or 3 turns, but at the turn about 6-7 energy, those are very easily dispatched by larger cards. So you've got to have something to trade off at that point. You've got to have something to draw fire from, or really put up a stronger stance, whether that is multiple Smirnovs, whether that is a big beefy tank or frontline, a troop with an amazing rally ability, mercenaries, whatever the case it may be. You've got to have something to bolster them at that point, because one card, a defensive satellites, can ruin your entire board. So you've got to have troops with 4 or 5 health to hopefully withstand that. 6 or 7 health is preferred, which is one reason why Helios Mortar is such a nice card, as well as Mount Pharos, because they've got high health, but also they're generating more cards that could be high cost for you, or at least Pharos is. Yeah, so I put down the gambit as far as running the shield generator down and putting other troops as I did on this turn, because he had low cards in hand. I knew that Bloodthirst was going away. I felt pretty good about that. Again, I'm going to try to deny as much as possible his options. I want to get rid of that Angel's Tears, because that's just a nasty ability that he can throw out there and get rid of the shield generator. I want to make him attack. I want to make him attack with his troop. And the fact that his Requiem put health on that troop just means that he can't, throw down another Requiem troop next to an Angel's Tears and do more damage. I'm feeling fairly good. I'm feeling very good with him. Now, the fact that he stuns, that's nasty. So I'm going to have to, recover to some degree. We'll force his hand a little bit. Play that artillery strike, most likely, with the Fairn's Militia. I don't know why I keep calling him Felon's Militia. He's only got 2 cards in hand, right? So that's not a great spot for him to be. I've got 5 plus the ability to constantly generate a troop. He can beef up whatever he's got with it. Now, though he could have an Angels, Descent of Angels, but I don't think he does, because he would have played it this turn. That would have been a huge swing in his favor. The fact that he hasn't is good for me. So now we get into protect mode. I'm going to throw that down. Yes, the Helios is possibly vulnerable, but because I got a little bit lucky on that one, I'm feeling good. I'm putting this over here next to this troop just to avoid any sort of tactic damage. 1 health is not a great place to be, but at the same time, it is behind a front line, and it's about to get behind 2 front lines, which makes me feel good about that. And then I can throw down big big mountain. I was tempted to, I think, at that turn to throw down Duke as well as the shield generator, but I felt the mountain at this point would give me higher value in terms of whether it was just 1 or 2 troops. That's going to make a bigger difference for me. Whereas shield generator, if he doesn't have a tactic in his 2 cards in hand, then it's not going to matter. What's the point of putting down that card? So I'd rather save up for it. And then we can just rinse, wash, and repeat. You know, I've got the mountain. I've got some front lines. I'm able to throw down and put out some hate on that guy. Now, the fact that he's got a beefy front line, or a beefy Parada veterans, I had to throw out both of my front line to get rid of that. Otherwise, it was going to be able to take out Duke or the mountain, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. So I want to keep that card around as long as possible and force his play. He's got just troops at this point. He is top decking. I've got a card that's creating cards. I've got a warlord that's creating troops. I've got the high ground, as it were. So this is just really where we want to be. It's a grind, and Lotara decks don't have to be a grind. We've seen a couple quick ones here just today, but ultimately that's kind of how she wins. Through the attrition, through grinding down, through protecting whatever it is that she's protecting. If it is an aggressive warlord, by just stymieing their attempts to deal damage to her or to her high-powered troops. Whatever the case is, it is just how she wins. And then she throws down a big, nasty troop or two to kind of solidify the deal. But that early game is important. Playing a frontline troop, playing 2 frontline troops, plus a low-cost troop that has consistent long game or start of game value is really at that point how you lock down everything, how you gain the board and you keep the board, and it has to happen early with her. And I think, yeah, he's got to his host of angels. It's way too late. That's just not going to do him any good except try to draw the turnout. I don't know how much further he's going with this. I think at this point he's just trying to see if we're going to go long, and we can, but why? But why? Why do we need to go long? I don't think we need to go long here. Now that's one thing with Meros. Meros itself has got a kind of ability that if he sits on it, he can keep himself alive for a while. The fact that he's had his Requiem bolster the health of his troops a couple times has actually kind of worked to his detriment. As much as they're keeping troops alive, his health could be higher. His health could have the same health as my warlord. Instead, he's actually got less. But he also he's out of options. He can't keep up. There's just no way at this point. And I think that kind of wraps it up. I don't know how much. I think actually this turn here with that with the Thorbrand Hunters, that kind of helps. Next turn is the end game scenario. I don't know if I think really at this point he's holding out for hope that he'll draw the Crimson Spectre, because that would wipe out almost my whole board, right? He would wipe out almost my whole board, and he would recover a bunch of health. The problem with that in this scenario, where I've got all these cards in hand and he would just be playing the card from the top of his deck, it's not going to do him any good, because then I could still just dump 2 to 3 to 4 more cards from my hand, and he's done nothing. So I think he wraps it up. I think he realizes the futility. It's just not going to happen. Long game, but a good game, a grind fest, as it were. That's it. That's Lotara, guys. I hope this has been useful for you. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it kind of gave you some ideas. If you were looking at her, if you're kind of, I don't know about Lotara. She's worth playing. She's fun. She is a frontline warlord, and as such, she has a certain expectation with how she plays. But everything that you fit in there is really up to you as far as how you want to synergize your deck and build your deck. So hope that's been useful. I hope you find these videos useful. If you do, if you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and do so. And like the video. Let me know if you've got any thoughts. If there's other things that you'd like to throw in with Lotara, hit me up in the comments. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we'll talk to you later. All right, bye.